David, what religion were you raised?
Jewish.
Was anyone raised Catholic, the one true faith? No offense, David. What do you think of Jesus, David? Tread carefully.
I think he was one of our best Jews.
He was a good Jew.
Yeah,
he was a good Jew. Not a Jew. Abraham J-Dog.
Yeah.
You got it cut off, too.
Yeah.
We got that in common, David. We got those little headless horsemen down there. It is ironic that your penis looks like a German army helmet.
My parents are hippies from Bastion Island in Washington State.
What was the island? Bastion? Do we know that, David?
Yeah.
What's the deal with that island? What do you know about it, David?
I think his parents lived there.
That was actually really clever and really witty, David. I like that. That's why the Jews run comedy.
Good morning. It is Wednesday, Management Wednesday, July the 10th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have the patriotic shorts, motivation, Bishop Barron, Ayn Rand, the 33 strategies of war, and management of the absurd. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. Now, Stuart Varney and the headlines.
Join us next week. We are live from the RNC convention. We're going to be in Milwaukee. Mornings with Maria will be originating from Milwaukee and the RNC all week next week, Monday to Thursday. And we will likely get the news from Donald Trump on who his vice presidential pick is. So stay with us live from the RNC. That'll do it for today. Have a great day, everybody. I'll see you tomorrow. Varney and Company picks it up. Stu, take it away.
Good morning, Maria. Good morning, everyone. We have two big stories for you today. President Biden's ongoing battle to stay at the head of the Democrats' ticket and the ongoing record-breaking stock market rally. We'll start with politics. Biden's struggles have gripped the nation. Here's the latest. Michael Bennet becomes the first Senate Democrat to break with the president. He says Trump may beat Biden in a landslide. The argument about the president's medical condition will not go away. The White House says Biden does not have Parkinson's disease, but some doctors observing his behavior say, yes, he does have it. The polls are moving against the president. The Cook Political Report says 3 swing states, Arizona, Nevada, and Georgia, have moved from toss-up to leading Republican. All right, let's get to the markets and look at those tech stocks go. New highs for the S&P and the Nasdaq at the close yesterday. This morning, the Dow's going to be up maybe 30-odd points. The S&P up 14. And look at that Nasdaq, home of the tech stocks, up another 80 points at the opening bell. Bitcoin, you're looking at about $58,000 at the moment. The yield on the 10-year Treasury, I pegged it just above 4.25%. You're at 4.28. And the 2-year, last time I checked, was 4.62. Now it's 4.61. Oil back to $81 a barrel, 81.27. Gas has started to move up a little, 3.53 on average for regular. That's up 2 cents. Diesel at 3.88. That is up 2 cents as well. Gold on your screen, 23.85. It's up $17. On the show today, Trump campaigns in Florida, drawing a crowd of thousands. He introduced Marco Rubio, teasing the crowd about his pick for vice president. He also challenged Biden to $1 million charity golf showdown. Kamala Harris getting a lot of attention. She's making news today by saying the pro-Hamas demonstrators are, quote, showing exactly what the human emotion should be as a response to Gaza. What about the hostages? And then there is 16-year-old Lamine Yamal. You'll be hearing a lot about him. He scored a brilliant goal that put Spain in the final of the Euro soccer tournament. People are comparing him. Look at that goal. That's just beautiful. That's poetry. They're comparing him to Pele. Wednesday, July the 10th, 2024, Varney & Company is about to begin.
Thank you. Now, Stuart Varney's My Take.
That's the markets on a Wednesday morning, and now this. The president and his inner circle are desperately trying to hide his true mental and physical condition. It is a struggle. Hunter has been living at the White House since the disastrous debate. Jill Biden has been circling around the president. They built a wall of denial around him. Trouble is, it's just not holding up. The bottom line is this. Nobody believes that Joe Biden can be president for 4 more years. Nobody believes that. And that includes George Stephanopoulos. He had interviewed the president and asked him if he was frail. No, my memory's fine. Could you serve 4 more years? I wouldn't be running if I didn't think I could. That's a non-answer. Well, Stephanopoulos was just caught on camera saying, no, he didn't think Biden could last. That was an honest answer. The walls are crumbling. Colorado's Michael Bennet became the first Democrat senator to break ranks. He's come right out with it. Biden can't win. In fact, he says Trump may win in a landslide. Obama's former staffer, David Axelrod, he says Biden can't win. Bill Clinton's guy, James Carville, says, move over, Joe, you can't win. The immediate issue is Parkinson's disease. That's a progressive disorder that affects the nervous system. Does the president have it? No, says his inner circle. Yes, say some doctors who've never examined him, but who have observed his increasing difficulties. The president himself can clear this up by making his doctor available for questions. Not going to happen. That's a privacy issue. Maybe he should take a cognitive test. No, says Biden. Nobody said I have to. And besides, I take a test every day. Kind of lame, you think? Here's another problem for the president. The polls, they're moving against him. The latest is the influential Cook Political Report. He says 3 swing states, Arizona, Nevada, and Georgia, have moved from toss-up to leaning Republican. Politico says deep blue New York has become a battleground state. That is incredible. The Democrats are stuck with their own problem. They don't think Biden can win, but they can't get him out. One last point. Biden is scheduled to do a full-scale press conference tomorrow. He will have his note cards, maybe a teleprompter. It's not so much what he says as how he says it. That's what everyone wants to know. Can he do the job for 4 more years? Second hour of Varney just getting started.
And that was Stuart Varney's My Take. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, the Patriotic Shorts.
On March 28, 1982, a British tank shot down an enemy fighter jet. During the Falklands War, British and Argentine forces clashed heavily, but a group of 4 British FV-107 Scimitar light tanks played a crucial role. The Scimitar, weighing 7.8 tons and measuring 5 meters in length, was crewed by 3 personnel: a commander, gunner, and driver. Its main weapon, the 30mm Rardin cannon, was capable of firing different types of ammunition, including high explosive and armor-piercing ones. But one of the three tanks was manned by 18-year-old Reg Hastings. As Hastings moved across an open field, he spotted an Argentine Mirage fighter jet diving straight towards them. It was a Mirage 3, one of the most feared and successful aircraft at the time. This fighter jet could easily destroy all four vehicles in Hastings' group. Hastings fired a barrage of high explosive shells from the cannon. His first shots missed, but the fourth round struck below the cockpit, making the Mirage explode mid-air and crash.
On January 19, 1991, they finally met. That day over northern Iraq, F-15s were getting close to enemy fighters, who they thought were MiG-29s, as the E-3 told them. But soon, they witnessed MiG-25 Foxbats. An F-15 pilot immediately pulled 12 Gs, even though only 9 Gs were allowed, to lock the Foxbat. But the MiG quickly broke the lock with a defensive spin. But once again, the MiG-25 was locked on, and the F-15 released an AIM-9. However, the Foxbat dodged the Sidewinder with flares and tried to run now. The F-15 pilot attempted to catch the MiG and fired an AIM-7 Sparrow, but guess what? The missile flew right over the MiG's canopy without detonating. Then, another AIM-9 was fired and flared, and the annoyed pilot was now thinking about using his cannon. But he gave AIM-7 another chance. This time, the Sparrow did its job and downed one MiG-25 Foxbat. In 1941, a small country with a population of just 95,000 people, the Tuvan People's Republic, declared war on Germany. It is said that Adolf was amused upon hearing this. Despite its small size, the Tuvans sent 8,000 brave horsemen to the front during the war. The Tuvans participated in battles on the approaches to Moscow, Stalingrad, and in the liberation of Ukraine. In western Ukraine, a captured German officer named Remke said that their appearance was a shock to his soldiers. They saw in them the wild Mongols that Joseph Goebbels had so frightened them with. These warriors, moving on small, shaggy horses with cavalry carbines, reminded them of the ancient Huns, their combat skills and traditional methods of warfare, where they took no prisoners and finished off the wounded with knives, seemed to the Germans to be the embodiment of ancient legends.
A German came down with a fixed bayonet on a rifle and went through my field jacket and cut that out and went through the fleshy part here and fell on the ground in front of me. He came at me again with the bayonet, and I reached to try to get the end of the rifle, and when I did, he pulled the bayonet back, and that's why this finger is like this. It almost cuts his finger off. The second time that he went back like that, I had time, even with a finger almost cut off, to get my pistol, and I got it out. And when he came at that time, I shot him twice. And he fell on the ground, rolled a couple of times on the side of the hill, and I checked him. He was dead. He's the only person in my lifetime that I had to kill.
I was with Klaus Schwab this winter.
You were with Klaus Schwab?
I was just trying to casually drop that, Sean. I was with Klaus Schwab. As Klaus Schwab said to me, so the closer you get, the more you realize that the people running things are like mediocre. They're buffoons. They have no idea what they're doing. Tony Blinken, I mean, really? They are motivated by rage and envy. They're not the people who built the current society that we live in. Anything worth having they did not build, from our beautiful train stations to Harvard University to our legal code to anything that's great about America. They didn't create anything, and they're not capable of it. And they're mad about it. And they're mad in the way that primitive, envious people are mad. You know, they don't celebrate beauty, they destroy beauty. You see this a lot. It's one of the main motivators of evil, in my view.
And that was the Patriotic Shorts. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, a little bit of motivation.
Sometimes your life won't turn out how you planned it. It turns out how you work for it. How you wake up and you chase that dream every single morning. It's what you give your time and your energy to. that takes you to the next level. You see, I witnessed the death of my mother, the death of my grandfather, the incarceration of my father, and still I stood. Because when I walked in those projects, I realized one thing. I realized this, that my dream never lived down there. I realized that everything I ever dreamed of lives in the sky, and I must jump every single day to go reclaim what's mine. And that's royalty. You see, many of us believe that just because our father was a drug dealer and our uncle was a drug dealer, that is our life and that is our forever. But I want you to know something. That is only a lesson to show us to be something more than what they thought we can be. You see, when a family tree is dying, all you have to do is take care of the roots. And if the roots is too dead to bring the tree back alive, you plant another one. Young king and queen, I'm sorry, but we live in a generation today where you're going to have to grow up right now. You're going to have to be phenomenal in everything you do because everyone in the world is chasing greatness. And what do you do when a man is going 100 miles per hour and you haven't even started the engine yet? The best gifts come from the bottom. They say, well, why you want to be great? I don't want to be great for me. I want to be great so them project babies can look in the mirror and say, I am too. I am special. That flower grew in the same streets that I grew up in. That rose up through that concrete, and so can I. It's a mentality. Roses can grow in the projects if you take care of the soil. It don't matter how big the house is, baby. It's the love inside of it. Take care of your community. Take care of your brothers and sisters. Hold cowards accountable for what they put in your neighborhoods. Put your crown back on your head. Let the world know your name. King and queen. This means you gotta work. This means you have to grind when they sleep. You gotta grind when they won't. You gotta grind when you do not feel like it. And this in all areas in life. School, sports, your religion. Consistency is the tunnel to greatness. Consistency will turn an ordinary man into something he never thought he can be. I want you to look in the mirror, young kings and queens today. If you're growing up with nothing and you're growing up without, I want you to look in the mirror and I want you to say these words. I want you to say that I am royalty. I am more of my generational curses. I am more than my drug addict father. I am more than my incarcerated uncle. No, I'm not better than them, but I want to do better for them. I want to give our last name a legacy that will be remembered forever. That when people speak of it, people will smile automatically.
Thank you. And now the Daily Stoic.
Cut the strings that pull your mind. Understand at last that you have something in you more powerful and divine than what causes the bodily passions and pulls you like a mere puppet. What thoughts now occupy my mind? Is it not fear, suspicion, desire, or something like that? Marcus Aurelius, Meditations, 12.19. Think of all the interests vying for a share of your wallet or for a second of your attention. Food scientists are engineering products to exploit your taste buds. Silicon Valley engineers are designing applications as addictive as gambling. The media is manufacturing stories to provoke outrage and anger. These are just a small slice of the temptations and forces acting on us, distracting us and pulling us away from the things that truly matter. Marcus, thankfully, was not exposed to these extreme parts of our modern culture. But he knew plenty of distracting sinkholes too. Gossip, the endless call of work, as well as fear, suspicion, lust. Every human being is pulled by these internal and external forces that are increasingly more powerful and harder to resist. Philosophy is simply asking us to pay careful attention and to strive to be more than a pawn. As Viktor Frankl puts it in The Will to Meaning, man is pushed by drives, but pulled by values. These values and inner awareness prevent us from being puppets. Sure, paying attention requires work and awareness, but isn't that better than being jerked about on a string?
And that was the Daily Stoic. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Bishop Robert Barron.
We do indeed have within Christianity a tradition of referring to Jesus as master or teacher, and to those of us who follow him as disciples or learners. And that's altogether right. But here's the problem. All sorts of other religious figures could be seen as a master who have disciples. Even someone like Socrates, the philosopher, could be seen as a teacher who has disciples or followers. Disciple from discere in Latin just means to learn. Nothing wrong with that when it comes to Christianity, but it doesn't go deep enough. Because in Christianity, we have not simply a relationship of student to teacher when it comes to Jesus. Rather, we participate organically in him. Let me say that again. He's not just our teacher, not just our moral exemplar, not someone we simply imitate from a historical distance. We live in him. We are rooted and grounded in him. That's the way a Christian relates to Jesus.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Quote, statism needs war. A free country does not. Statism survives by looting. A free country survives by production. Unquote. That was Ayn Rand from The Roots of War, from the book Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the 33 strategies of war.
When cast and crew were tired on set, or when they'd gotten too casual and were chatting rather than concentrating on their work, Hitchcock would never yell or complain. Instead, he might smash a light bulb with his fist or throw his teacup against a wall. Everyone would quickly sober up and recover his or her focus. Clearly, Hitchcock mistrusted language and explanation, preferring action to words as a way of communicating, and this preference extended to the form and content of his films. That gave his screenwriters a particularly hard time. After all, putting the film into words was their job. In story meetings, Hitchcock would discuss the ideas he was interested in, themes like people's doubleness, their capacity for both good and evil, the fact that no one in this world is truly innocent. The writers would produce pages of dialogue expressing these ideas elegantly and subtly, only to find them edited out in favor of actions and images. In Vertigo, 1958, and Psycho, 1960, for example, Hitchcock inserted mirrors in many scenes. In Spellbound, 1945, it was shots of ski tracks and other kinds of parallel lines. The murder in Strangers on a Train, 1951, was revealed through its reflection in a pair of glasses. For Hitchcock, evidently, images like these revealed his ideas of the doubleness in the human soul better than words did. But on paper, this seemed somewhat contrived.
And that was the from the 33 Strategies of War by Robert Greene. Back in a minute. Thank you. So if you're a Democrat, you should vote for somebody else other than Joe Biden because he simply hasn't done anything for you. I'm not talking about how he's not conservative enough or he hasn't balanced the budget or things like that because I know you guys don't particularly care about all that. I'm talking about the things you care about. Number one thing he was going to do that you care about is stack the court. He was going to expand it by 4 seats. By going ahead and getting D.C. to be a state, Puerto Rico to be a state, et cetera, et cetera. Whatever happened to that? He started a committee or commission to study the problem, and that's where all good ideas go to die. And so that's nothing. So now what about single payer? Where are we on single payer? Because isn't it Obamacare supposed to be a step in the direction of single payer? So how come that hasn't happened? He hasn't done anything. What about war? Democrats are supposed to be the party of peace. But he has allowed 2 wars to break out and continue under his administration. So, and then again, what about things like inflation? Going to the grocery store and having to pay more. And nobody can deny that there's inflation because we all go to the grocery store and we all know that the prices have gone up. And that's no good for anybody. So just for those 3 things, why bother to vote for Joe Biden? He hasn't done for you what he promised to do. So you got to vote for somebody else. If you can't bring yourself to vote Republican, then vote Robert Kennedy. Back in a minute. Thank you. So a word about my motivation segment. A lot of these motivation segments are talking about grinding. Grind. I play them even though they're always talking about grinding because they're still motivating for me in that I like the enthusiasm. There's a lot of enthusiasm. There's a lot of energy. The emphasis on personal efforts, personal initiative, personal responsibility. But grinding is good only and appropriate only if you're looking for short-term goals. So if you're 16 years old and you want to join the varsity football team, grinding is appropriate, especially since you're 16 and your only jobs are doing your homework and taking out the trash. You have plenty of time to grind. Or if you're going to be trying out for the Olympic team or something, then grinding is absolutely appropriate. But for most of us, what we're looking for is long-term goals. We're looking for long-term health and fitness, long-term financial goals, etc. That does not require grinding. What that requires is now I'm drawing a blank on it. Is giving yourself a margin for error. Grinding is basically giving yourself little or no margin for error. And again, that's great for short term. But the longer term goals that you want to accomplish, you must give yourself margin for error. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the next chapter, it's going to be chapter 6 of Speechless, Controlling Words and Controlling Minds by Michael Knowles.
Chapter 6.
The tolerant left. If you think we're rallying now, you ain't seen nothing yet, warned Maxine Waters, the influential Democrat politician who has held elected office since the Ford administration. Already you have members of your cabinet that have been booed out of restaurants, who have protesters taken up at their house, who sang, "No peace, no sleep. No peace, no sleep," she reminded President Trump, while her supporters cheered. Then came the call to arms. If you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd, and you push back on them, and you tell them they're not welcome anymore, anywhere. Democrats did as they were told. A few months after Waters' war cry, Democrats mobbed Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao and her husband, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, at a restaurant in Louisville, Kentucky. Around that same time, another group of left-wing activists swarmed Texas Senator Ted Cruz and his wife, Heidi, at a restaurant in Washington, D.C. And still another group vandalized the home of conservative cable news host Tucker Carlson. Rather than condemn Waters' radical rhetoric, Democrat leadership amplified it. You cannot be civil with a political party that wants to destroy what you stand for, what you care about, declared Hillary Clinton. But Hillary's first 4 words would have sufficed to convey her point. You cannot be civil. Either civility extends to one's political adversaries, who by definition seek to destroy what their opponents stand for and care about, or else it has no purpose at all. Civility, which derives from the Latin civilis, relating to citizens, preserves polite and peaceful relations among citizens with divergent interests and opinions. To reject civility is to reject self-government. So much for the tolerant left. That phrase has become a punchline, first among conservatives, who accuse the left of hypocrisy for praising tolerance while censoring dissent, but later also among liberals, who deem conservatives intolerant and therefore undeserving of tolerance. Both sides have a point. The left is intolerant, but the right oversimplifies and consequently misunderstands what tolerance means. When opponents of cancel culture demand that we cancel culture, they do not contradict themselves. Neither did Chesterton when he observed that there is a thought that stops thought, and that is the only thought that ought to be stopped. Similarly, leftists observe that there is a tolerance that undermines tolerance, and that sort of tolerance must not be tolerated. Tolerance means the bearing of hardship, an intrinsically limited concept, as man can only bear so much before he breaks his ability to bear anything at all. During the 1960s, left-wing radicals recognized that tolerance must always have limits, and so they set out not to destroy tolerance, but to shift and even invert its bounds. Herbert Marcuse, the scholar who developed critical theory at the Frankfurt School in the 1930s, returned to prominence in the 1960s through his subversive books One-Dimensional Man and A Critique of Pure Tolerance, which earned him the title Father of the New Left. During the intervening decades, Marcuse had prepared reports on Nazi Germany for the U.S. government, first in the Office of War Information and later at the Office of Strategic Services, the precursor to the Central Intelligence Agency. In 1945, Marcuse continued his intelligence work for the government at the State Department as head of its Central European Bureau. At first glance, the government's employment of a prominent Marxist during World War II might suggest some sort of conspiracy, until one remembers that the United States officially allied in that war with Joseph Stalin, the most powerful communist on earth, to defeat the Nazis. War and politics make for strange bedfellows. But why did the government continue to employ Marcuse for 7 years after the war ended? We now know the State Department employed many communists during those years, most notably Alger Hiss, who helped found the United Nations before his conviction 5 years later for perjury in regard to an earlier, expired charge of espionage on behalf of the Soviets. Whether subversion, incompetence, or some other motive prompted the government to employ Marcuse for so long after the war, in 1952, the Marxist philosopher turned his attention back to academia. Over the next 2 decades, some of the most elite universities in the country welcomed Marcuse. He taught first at Columbia, then Harvard, next Brandeis, and finally the University of California, San Diego, where taxpayers funded his blistering critiques of America and the insurrections they incited. In his 1964 work, One-Dimensional Man, Marcuse castigated the United States as a totalitarian society that repressed the authenticity and liberation of the individual through mass media and technology. Marcuse may have overstated his case, but conservatives understand as well as anyone the insidious political effects of mass media and technology, particularly today as the handful of corporations that control both segments of society censor and ostracize anyone to the right of Hillary Clinton. One sometimes wonders whether the frequent inscrutability of Marcuse's prose owes more to the quirks of his native German tongue or to the perversity of his ideological ends. In any case, when Marcuse does manage to make his meaning clear, he often makes keen observations, offensive though they may be to traditional American sensibilities. Therein lies the genius of critical theory. Everything that exists is susceptible to criticism. The cultural vandal undertakes the ruthless criticism of all that exists more easily than the conservative cultivates and builds. But if American society fails to live up to its allegedly liberal, pluralistic, tolerant ideals, what ought to replace it? Marcuse offered an answer: repressive tolerance. The realization of the objective of tolerance would call for intolerance toward prevailing policies, attitudes, opinions, and the extension of tolerance to policies, attitudes, and opinions which are outlawed and suppressed, Marcuse explained in 1965. In other words, toleration for me, but not for thee. Though conservatives both then and now tend to regard tolerance as an abstract, eternal, and boundless ideal, Marcuse and the radicals he inspired recognized tolerance as a contextual, bounded concept. From one vantage, no institution in history has rivaled the tolerance of the Catholic Church, which welcomes men of every race, sex, language, labor, and class. From another perspective, no institution has ever been so intolerant as the Church, which launched a millennium of inquisitions and crusades to quash heresy. Milton's encomium to free speech, Areopagitica, preaches tolerance for all points of view, so long as they're Protestant. No regime, no matter how tolerant, can tolerate everything. Today, tolerance appears again as what it was in its origins, at the beginning of the modern period: a partisan goal, a subversive, liberating notion and practice, wrote Marcuse. Conversely, what is proclaimed and practiced as tolerance today is in many of its most effective manifestations serving the cause of oppression. The father of the New Left considered tolerance a value-neutral tool that could be harnessed for good or for ill. Just as, in Marcuse's mind, the capitalist system exploits tolerance to stamp out individuality and oppress the masses, radicals could wield tolerance as a weapon of liberation to tear down the system. The totalitarian democracy of the United States, Marcuse complained, had destroyed critical thought and obliterated the difference between true and false, information and indoctrination, right and wrong. Here, Marcuse conceals the radicalism of his proposal behind euphemism, but hints of his partisan ends creep out. What precisely distinguishes information from indoctrination? Both words simply mean teaching. The former entered English in the early 14th century with the meaning to train or instruct in some specific object. The latter appeared in the 1620s with the meaning to teach. Marcuse simply considers some teaching good, namely his own, and other teaching bad. Rather than discerning between truth and falsehood, or right and wrong, as those terms have traditionally been understood, Marcuse appears more concerned with the distinction between politically correct and politically incorrect. Pure tolerance would permit all views into the public square and allow people to make up their own minds. But according to Marcuse, the people, having been educated, or rather indoctrinated, in the propaganda of America's totalitarian society, lack the liberty of mind to distinguish between true and false ideas. To enable them to become autonomous, to find by themselves what is true and what is false for man in the existing society, he asserts, they would have to be freed from the prevailing indoctrination, which is no longer recognized as indoctrination. Since the allegedly oppressive traditional society has already slanted the people so far in the direction of falsehood, Marcuse insists that the trend would have to be reversed. They would have to get information slanted in the opposite direction, through undemocratic means, as the deluded masses cannot understand their own oppression. In the name of objectivity and free thought, he proposes control and propaganda. Marcuse justifies his censorship in the name of liberation. Unlike classical liberalism, which defines liberty as the absence of coercion, and also contrary to Christianity, which defines liberty as the rejection of sin, Marcuse defines liberation as a matter of history. Freedom is liberation, he explains, a specific historical process in theory and practice, and as such, it has its right and wrong, its truth and falsehood. When progressives refer to the right side of history, or claim that the arc of the moral universe bends toward justice, they are invoking the same alleged historical process. The Coen brothers pilloried this conception of history, and Herbert Marcuse himself, in their 2016 comedy Hail Caesar. George Clooney's tailor-made character, movie star Baird Whitlock, spends an evening with a secret communist study group led by Professor Marcuse, who indoctrinates him in his theories. When Whitlock returns to the film studio, he gushes to his boss about the radical professor. "These guys are pretty interesting," Whitlock tells the studio chief, Eddie Mannix. "They've actually figured out the laws that dictate everything. History, sociology, politics, morality, everything. It's all in a book called Capital with a K." "Is that right?" asks a visibly irritated Mannix. "Yeah," Whitlock goes on. "You're not going to believe this. These guys even figured out what's going on here at the studio." He explains, "We may tell ourselves that we're creating something of artistic value, where there's some sort of spiritual dimension to the picture business. But what it really is this fat cat, Nick Skank, out in New York, running this factory, serving up these lollipops to what they used to call the bread and circuses for the..." At which point Mannix pulls Whitlock from his chair, smacks him across the face, and reminds him that the so-called fat cat founded their feasts. Marcuse's highfalutin historical sense and pretentious prose seduced countless mid-century dimwits like Baird Whitlock. The turgid prose dulled readers' senses, but eventually he came to his point. Censor conservatives. Liberating tolerance, then, would mean intolerance against movements from the right, and toleration of movements from the left, Marcuse concluded. Conservative speech, by inhibiting liberation and oppressing the masses, constitutes violence and must not be tolerated. 21st century leftists have embraced Marcuse's argument and use it to justify kicking conservatives off of college campuses and out of corporate boardrooms. These fragile radicals claim that conservative speech makes them feel unsafe, which is why they need ever-expanding safe spaces barred to conservatives. The most excitable radicals claim that conservative speech not only makes them feel unsafe, but even physically harms them. In 2017, Lisa Feldman Barrett proclaimed in the New York Times that, "While sticks and stones may break our bones, words can also hurt us." Scientifically speaking, she warned, it's not that simple. Words can have a powerful effect on your nervous system. Certain types of adversity, even those involving no physical contact, can make you sick, alter your brain, even kill neurons, and shorten your life. Barrett, like Marx and his acolytes before her, invokes science to suggest that one may not reasonably disagree with her. We may quibble over politics or philosophy, she implies, but science is a settled matter. One wonders how long the New York Times would remain in print under a Republican administration should Barrett's proposed banning of noxious language pass into law. Perhaps for that reason, most mainstream leftist censorship advocates have offered more modest arguments for curtailing conservative speech. During the campus uprisings of 2017 and 2018, left-wing opinion columnists invoked the most banal cliché in the censorship toolkit, that no one has the right to yell fire in a crowded theater. The line derives from the 1919 Supreme Court case Schenck v. United States, in which the justices unanimously upheld convictions under the Espionage Act of 1917 for distributing flyers opposing the draft in World War I. One suspects the left might hesitate to invoke this principle if they understood the political context in which it arose. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes defended the court's abridgment of free speech on the grounds that the flyers created a clear and present danger, by hampering the government's efforts to recruit soldiers for the war. The most stringent protection of free speech, the justice insisted, would not protect a man falsely shouting fire in a theater and causing a panic. But Holmes appears to have changed his mind later that year when he dissented in Abrams versus United States, arguing that the distribution of flyers opposing the government's interference in the Russian Revolution did not violate the Espionage Act. And in 1969, the court partially overturned the Schenck decision in Brandenburg versus Ohio. Nevertheless, the lazy phrase has persisted in our discourse. Herbert Marcuse himself invoked the phrase, writing, "The traditional criterion of clear and present danger seems no longer adequate to a stage where the whole society is in the situation of the theater audience when somebody cries fire." Taking Holmes's logic to an extreme and dubious conclusion, Marcuse invoked the general deviation of society from his ideal to justify permanent censorship. The country was in crisis, according to Marcuse, and we simply did not have time to inquire too closely into the details. Urgency demanded we act. Marcuse's political heirs seem to embrace this line of argument more and more closely each year. Citing the supposed scientific consensus regarding changes in the weather, the socialist politician Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez predicts a dozen years remain till Armageddon, and thereby justifies the fundamental reordering of society. The 2,700-page Affordable Care Act, better known as Obamacare, might cause millions of Americans to lose their physicians and upend whole industries. But who has time to read it when the need is so urgent? "We have to pass the bill immediately," Nancy Pelosi explains, "so that you can find out what is in it." Marcuse employed the same scare tactics. He redefined clear and present danger to mean whatever he disliked, much as 21st century leftists do when they classify constitutionally protected gun ownership as a public health crisis, or the predictions of fickle meteorological models as a national emergency. Rather than admit the enormity of his plan to reorder society, Marcuse pretended social circumstances had so shifted that his radical proposals actually fit within the American legal tradition. Any remedy for society's urgent ills must begin with stopping the words and images which feed this false consciousness, prescribed Marcuse, invoking a concept that would figure more fully into political correctness in the ensuing decades. To be sure, this is censorship, even pre-censorship, but openly directed against the more or less hidden censorship that permeates the free media. Conservatives often dismiss the claim that there already exists a hidden conservative censorship, which radicals simply seek to overturn. But here again, the radical professor understands language and standards better than the conservatives who presume to refute him. Marcuse's observation that words and images shape consciousness requires no explanation. If they didn't, why would anyone care about the politically correct attempt to redefine them? But his claim that hidden censorship permeates even ostensibly free media merits consideration as well. Today, vulgar language and sexually explicit images pervade television and film. But for years, industry codes and even government regulations banned such expression. And public advocacy of communism or socialism could ostracize a man and even land him in the clink, as Mr. Schenck learned the hard way. Until the Supreme Court's landmark decision in Texas versus Johnson, which created or recognized, according to one's point of view, the constitutional right to burn the American flag, the law could prohibit desecration of venerated objects. Now courts hold that the First Amendment protects flag burning. And yet, in 2019, an Iowa judge sentenced 30-year-old Adolfo Martinez to 15 years in prison for the hate crime of stealing and burning a rainbow flag, which symbolizes colorful sexual desires. So in fact, the government still outlaws desecration of venerated objects. It's just that the objects of veneration are different. Previously neutral, value-free, formal aspects of learning and teaching now become, on their own grounds and in their own right, political, a process Marcuse encouraged as radical criticism throughout and intellectual subversion. In the past, though partisans disagreed on much, all waved the same American flag, which symbolized the nation founded on the belief that all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. Today, the American flag has become a partisan symbol. Left-wing athletes and even elected Democrats disrespect the Star-Spangled Banner, Conservative politicians hug and kiss it on the campaign trail. Where once school children learned the arguments that our founding fathers set forth at the Constitutional Convention, today they study the subversive calumny of the 1619 Project. While heretofore innocuous objects become politicized, previously political objects exit the public square. The burning of an American flag, once condemned by all, now constitutes legitimate political speech. Moral opprobrium for aberrant sexual acts, once almost universally held, now suggests a menage of phobias unfit for civilized society. Our prejudices have not disappeared. They have merely changed. Our prejudice regarding the word prejudice illustrates this shift. Today the term connotes injustice and irrationality, but until recently the word meant no more than a received opinion, the sentiments and instincts that pass through a culture without the aid of philosophic and scientific abstraction. Prejudices shape all cultures at all times, whether the acculturated admit it or not, and coherent conservatives once celebrated that fact. The Enlightenment of the 17th and 18th centuries established a common prejudice against prejudice, which the conservative philosopher Edmund Burke mocked in his Reflections on the Revolution in France. I am bold enough to confess that we are generally men of untaught feelings, that instead of casting away all our old prejudices, we cherish them to a very considerable degree, and, to take more shame to ourselves, we cherish them because they are prejudices, and the longer they have lasted, and the more generally they have prevailed, the more we cherish them. We are afraid to put men to live and trade, each on his own private stock of reason, because we suspect that this stock in each man is small, and that the individuals would do better to avail themselves of the general bank and capital of nations and of ages. Men are not walking, talking syllogisms. Only a fool would attempt to translate every impulse, passion, and preference he feels into the cold language of reason. Those radicals who vanquish their natural prejudices simply clear a space for new prejudices, a political reality Marcuse well understood. His description of prejudice reads as a mirror image of Burke's. He decries exactly what the Irish statesman celebrated. The avenues of entrance are closed to the meaning of words and ideas other than the established one, established by the publicity of the powers that be, and verified in their practices. Other words can be spoken and heard, other ideas can be expressed, but, at the massive scale of the conservative majority, outside such enclaves as the intelligentsia, they are immediately evaluated, id est, automatically understood, in terms of the public language, a language which determines a priori the direction in which the thought process moves. Thus, the process of reflection ends where it started, in the given conditions and relations. Ironically, Marcuse's lament makes a fine argument for just prejudice, if only conservatives could bring themselves to take it seriously. The conservative prejudices and established institutions of Marcuse's day inoculated society against the poisonous ideology that he and his fellow travelers peddled. Since then, however, radicals have succeeded at shifting those prejudices through a war of position that gave them control of every established institution. Consider the case of court packing. In 1937, President Franklin Roosevelt, frustrated that the Supreme Court continued to strike down many of his unconstitutional New Deal laws, attempted to increase the number of justices on the court, thereby supplying reliable judicial votes to ram his schemes through. The American people opposed the plan. Congress never took it up, and FDR's scheme fizzled. In 2020, however, court packing lost much of its fetor. Democratic legislators and even presidential candidates embraced the proposal. They went so far as to redefine the term by conflating the constitutionally mandated appointment of justices with the partisan addition of new justices to the bench. In the 1930s, the traditional American deference to legal norms prevailed. But by 2020, after decades of radical infiltration of the established institutions, conservatives could no longer rely on the old constitutional prejudices. Rather than ending where it started, the process of reflection Marcuse described led to an open debate. The outright reversal of prejudice regarding our national flag illustrates where that open debate inevitably leads. In a body politic where only subversives have the stones to stir hearts and make substantive claims, open debate will be won by the subversives. My friend Ben Shapiro rightly notes that facts don't care about your feelings, but we must add to that observation that politics cares greatly about our feelings, as the demagogic left well knows. Conservatives have refused even to state simple facts for fear of the politically correct lynch mob, retreating instead to arcane encomia on the right to free speech. The radicals have gained ground in our society by making substantive claims to advance an amoral agenda and then whipping their followers into a frenzy to defend them. When leftists contrived a fictional constitutional right to abortion in 1973, they not only invented a new form of jurisprudence wholly divorced from the text of the Constitution, they also asserted the positive goodness of murdering 1 million babies each year. They then hypnotized their acolytes into defending the slaughter as the essence of freedom. Conservatives' attempts to reverse this onslaught through compromise and cautious appeals to federalism have failed just as surely as an umbrella against a tsunami. When leftists railroaded right-wing judicial nominees, conservatives acquiesced and nominated more liberal jurists who reaffirmed the right to abortion. When leftists warned the public that conservative judges might outlaw abortion by overturning Roe, conservatives countered that any such reversal would do no more than return the butchery debate to the states. Conservatives have approached the issue of immigration in much the same way. Over the past half-century, more than 60 million immigrants have entered the United States, constituting the largest mass migration in recorded history. Polls consistently show that most Americans want to reduce overall immigration. A 2018 survey conducted by Harvard Center for American Political Studies and Harris Poll found that a full 81% of voters want to reduce not just illegal, but also legal immigration, and 63% of voters want to cut it by at least half. Yet even President Trump, the most hardline anti-immigration president in generations, restrained his rhetoric to call only for the reduction of illegal immigration. "I want people to come into our country in the largest numbers ever," he declared, "but they have to come in legally." Conservatives quibble over procedure, but they largely leave the substantive issues alone, even when the public largely agrees with their beliefs. Such is the cultural pull of political correctness. In the end, many, if not most, conservatives concede legal abortion and mass migration. They simply advocate a different mechanism for achieving the same left-wing end. Thus, the process of reflection ends where it started, in the given conditions and relations, just as Marcuse lamented in the relatively conservative culture of his age. One suspects the radical philosopher would smile at that line today. Tolerance necessarily has limits. The radicals of the 1960s understood this fact and set about to move the boundaries of our tolerance in what they considered a more favorable direction. For decades, conservatives have attempted to rebuff the radicals by denying the intrinsic limitations of tolerance, thus permitting leftists to shift the range of acceptable discourse, known sometimes as the Overton window, ever leftward. No less a liberal than John Locke, in his letter concerning toleration, admitted limits on tolerance. Locke began by praising toleration as the chief characteristic mark of the true church, so agreeable to the gospel of Jesus Christ. But soon enough, like his elder contemporary Milton, Locke questioned whether Catholics ought to be afforded that same toleration. That church can have no right to be tolerated by the magistrate, which is constituted upon such a bottom that all those who enter into it do thereby ipso facto deliver themselves up to the protection and service of another prince, Locke clarified, referring, one presumes, to the Pope. Much like 21st century Democrats, Locke was willing to tolerate Catholics only if the dogma lived not so loudly within them. But beyond Catholics, the great philosopher of toleration reserved his most trenchant intolerance for atheists. Those are not at all to be tolerated who deny the being of a God, Locke declared. For starters, promises, covenants, and oaths, which are the bonds of human society, can have no hold upon an atheist who rejects the moral order. The taking away of God, though but even in thought, dissolves all that one might cherish in society, and the atheists have none but themselves to blame, since, Those that by their atheism undermine and destroy all religion can have no pretense of religion whereupon to challenge the privilege of a toleration. Our notions of tolerance rely upon Christianity. One cannot coherently demand the former while rejecting the latter. Conservatives who invoke the high-minded tolerance of Locke with respect to our most radical opponents would benefit from actually reading the liberal philosopher. The atheism Locke decried has now combined with an overt hatred of our civilization, and the radicals who embody both have enlisted our culture's unique concept of tolerance as an instrument for its own destruction. Hence the split personality of political correctness, which, in the name of tolerance for marginalized people, enforces a rigid code of speech and behavior intolerant of dissent.
And that was Chapter 6, The Tolerant Left, from the book Speechless, Controlling Words and Controlling Minds by Michael Knowles. And I wanted to say that this was a chapter in which he goes through and explains to everybody what is being said, that demonstrating that he understands what the left is saying, but he has not demonstrated that he knows what the left is doing. He fails to understand that the left uses the word tolerance, they use many others also, but in this case the word tolerance as a way of creating a false dichotomy. And the idea is that they can come out and say, we're for tolerance. We're on the left and we're for tolerance. And they're daring you to oppose them, knowing that you won't, because you know that if you oppose them, then you get to be branded as intolerant. Don't listen to the right. They're intolerant. So you're with us or you're against us. But it's a false dichotomy, an obviously false dichotomy. So we got to figure out, how do we get out of the trap? And we get out of the trap by coming up with another word. I would suggest patience. Right off the top of my head, that's the one that comes to mind that seems to be a very suitable substitute. So when the left says tolerance, we say no, patience. We're patient. And patience is what's important. And we go on and on about being patient, thereby setting up our own, perhaps false dichotomy, suggesting, again, you're with us or you're against us. So if you're with the conservatives, if you're conservative, you're patient. If you're a socialist, you're impatient. Same kind of thing that they're trying to set up with us. So again, it's like porn. No one watches porn because they're interested in what is being said, only in what is being done. Think about it. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, from The Management of the Absurd, Chapter 12, Praising People Does Not Motivate Them. I have long questioned the cherished idea that people work better after being praised. I realize that here I am in unfriendly territory, because praise is perhaps the most widely used and thoroughly endorsed of all human relations techniques. Parents, managers, psychologists, teachers, everyone seems to believe in its value as a motivational tool, a reward, a way to establish good relationships. We value it because we have all experienced the thrill of discovering that someone we respect thinks highly of us. But I doubt that praise, when conscientiously employed as a management technique, always accomplishes what we think it does. Not that it does not have valuable functions, of which we are largely unaware, but I think our beliefs about its motivational value need closer scrutiny. Consider the following. Praise may, in fact, be perceived as threatening. Watch how people respond to praise. Don't they often react with discomfort or uneasiness? A very common response is a vague denial or derogation. I really can't take the credit for it, or you're just saying that. Praise a house or garden and its owner may hasten to point out its defects. Praise an employee for a project and that person is sometimes quick to play down his or her role in it. The defensiveness is compounded, of course, when the praise is unearned or undeserved. People react defensively because in praise there can be threat. After all, praise is an evaluation, and to be evaluated, to be judged, usually makes us uncomfortable, even if the evaluation is positive. Additionally, when you praise people, you are often trying to motivate them, to move them in a certain direction, to change them. The threat of change is nearly always disquieting. Instead of reassuring people about their worth, praise may be a way of gaining status over them. Giving praise establishes the fact that you are in a position to sit in judgment. A manager evaluating an employee needs to be sensitive to this. Even if the evaluation is positive, the employee can end up feeling diminished if it seems the manager is merely reinforcing his or her status. Interestingly, when the work of a high-status person is praised by a low-status person, it is often seen as presumptuous or even insulting. If an ordinary person were to have told Picasso, "You're a very good painter," that compliment would not likely have been particularly well received. In order to be acceptable, the praise must be given in a way that respects the status difference. "I love your painting." Praise may constrict creativity rather than free it. Some actions by managers are intended as rewards, like salaries and benefits. But because the employee has come to take them for granted, they no longer function as rewards. That can also be true with praise. When we demand it and it is routinely given, it no longer serves to motivate us. What really does release creativity and promote achievement is when a manager takes the time to get involved in the employee's work, learning what direction the work is taking, the problems and possibilities it presents, the way the employee is dealing with the task. But involvement is demanding and time-consuming, which probably explains why many managers resort to praise as a substitute, hoping that it will accomplish the same results. Praise can come to be associated mainly with criticism. This happens when we use praise to sugarcoat blame or employ the sandwich technique, whereby praise is followed by reproof, then repeated. "I'm very pleased with your work, Fred," says the boss. "You're really getting the work out, but..." Fred then hears the unhappy part of the story, the reprimand. The boss finishes up with, "Keep up the fine work." And Fred is shuttled out without quite knowing what hit him. This is also a favorite technique of parents and teachers, and we become so conditioned by its use from early childhood that when we are praised, we automatically get ready for the shock, the reproof. Rather than functioning as a bridge between people, praise may actually put distance between them. In a society that fills our daily lives with so many contacts, we need to find ways to establish distance, psychological elbow room between ourselves and others. Praise is one of the most effective simply because when we evaluate people, we are not likely to gain emotional proximity to them. See for yourself if praise doesn't tend to hold off, to separate, while other behaviors like listening tend to include, to embrace. Rather than opening the way to further contact, praise may be a means of terminating it. Think how often we use praise as a sign that a conversation or interview is over. "It's good to talk with you" means, "I've finished talking with you," and "You're doing fine, keep up the good work" usually signals the end of a conversation. When praise matters. Praise also helps to keep patterns of relationships between people and organizations relatively stable, allowing hierarchies or structures to be maintained. How does praise work toward this end? Let's take as an example a problem-solving committee meeting that includes the executive vice president at one end of the hierarchy and a new junior assistant at the other. If the assistant comes up with the brightest and most useful idea, some way must be found to accept it without lowering the status of the vice president in the eyes of the group, thereby threatening the group's stability. Intuitively, the vice president may say to the young assistant, "That's a very good idea. We can use that." This not-so-simple act of praise has resolved this situation nicely. Status has been maintained, because, as we remember, praise is a way of claiming status. The young assistant has been reminded of his place in the hierarchy, and the group is restored to comfortable equilibrium. In this situation and others like it, praise is a lubricant that helps keep our human relations in good working order. The fundamental issue with praise has to do with its credibility, which is eroded because it is used for so many purposes other than simply expressing appreciation. But on those all too infrequent occasions when it is believable, for example, when we read a letter written to a third party in which the reader speaks highly of us, not knowing that we will ever see the letter, praise is welcome indeed. And so that was chapter 12 from Management of the Absurd, about how praise may not always be motivating. And next is going to be part 4, The Politics of Management, chapter 13, Every Act is a Political Act. Back in a minute. Thank you. The following is one of my voiceover demos. If you're a voiceover artist and you would like to advertise one of your demos on my podcast, please send an MP3 to thedrill12, all one word, at gmail.com. That's thedrill12 at gmail.com. Back in a minute. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Caesar's Palace for 12 rounds of boxing. In the red corner, from Los Angeles, California, wearing the red trunks with the gold trim, weighing in at 125 pounds, the lightweight champion of the world, Danny Little Red Lopez. Well, Bill, our winners get a home theater receiver. That's right. Experience the full potential of high-definition video with this 72-channel digital home theater receiver from Yamaha. But wait, that's not all. They also get a 5.1-channel surround sound system from Mirage. With 5 palm-sized speakers and a compact subwoofer cube, the MX 5.1 brings you huge immersive sound with Mirage's omnipolar technology. All from the Spiegel catalog, Chicago, Illinois, 60609. And they're taking closer order as down the stretch they come. Mr. Hot Stuff has 3 lengths to make up with chocolate candy last. On the rail, take the points behind that gallant son with chocolate candy gaining on the outside. In the lead is Pioneer of the Nile being tackled by chocolate candy. They're neck and neck as they come to the wire. And Pioneer of the Nile holds off chocolate candy and wins the Santa Anita Derby. And now, on your feet, time to greet holder of 14 NBA titles, your home team, your Los Angeles Lakers. Number 3 at 6'8", 5th year out of UCLA, playing forward, Trevor Ariza. Starting at center, number 17 at 7 feet, 4th year out of St. Andrews High School, Andrew Bynum. And at guard, number 24, 6'6", 13th season out of Loyal Marion High School, Kobe Bryant. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there and reminding you that you are not neutral and that the government has no rights.